recognizes the ranking member for opening statement. I yield to the ranking member for an opening statement. I yield back.
Good morning, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Distinguished gentlelady from California, Mary Bono.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Chair now recognizes
The lady from California is recognized.
I'm pleased to introduce Congresswoman Mary Bono, former U.S. Representative for California's Inland Empire and Desert Region from 1998 to 2013.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentlelady is recognized.
I'm very pleased today to welcome my guest, Congressman Ken Calvert. Ken has been a longtime friend of mine. Actually, before a friend of mine, he was a friend of my late husband, Sonny. So we go way back, way back. I've watched his career. I served with Ken, and I cannot tell you that I am so impressed with Ken and how he serves in the Congress. Ken serves the 41st District of Southern California, and his district and mine, I think that our issues were very similar. My former district is now pretty much your district. But the issues that you know, Ken, you're an expert on policies that affect your district, specifically the Southland, Inland Empire, LA region as a whole. But you also have a huge portfolio that is national security, international scope. It's interesting because you have to do both of these things. You have to take care of the district at home, and then you also have to keep your eye on what's happening in the world. How do you do it all?
Well, I don't sleep a lot. No, I enjoy doing it. I enjoy staying abreast of what's going on worldwide. I get morning briefings every day. When I'm in D.C., I spend a lot of time in a SCIF, which is a secure room that I get classified briefings about what's happening here and there. Obviously, my job as the chairman of Defense Appropriations is to fund the military, and all the intelligence agencies. So we fund the Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps, the Guardians, obviously CIA, the NSA, the NRO, all of it. Need to stay abreast of this all the time. It's a big enterprise. It's the largest enterprise we do. It's half the discretionary budget of the United States government. Also serve on the Energy and Water Committee, primarily because of the nuclear weapons program, to keep track on our nuclear arsenal and our delivery systems and the like.
So you have to do all of that, and yet you have to make sure that things are running well at home and working at home in the district. And
Right.
It's almost as if being a member of Congress is two distinctly different jobs.
Yeah, obviously you know that, Mary. You have your constituent service, so you take care of people with their Social Security, or you have a tax problem or immigration issue. People have, roads that don't work, or you've got water infrastructure that needs to be repaired. All of that is part of the portfolio of a member of Congress, and you have to stay abreast of all of that and make sure that you take care of the folks here at home. And obviously in the state of California, as a senior appropriator here in California, as Jerry Lewis before me, I not just only work in my district, but throughout California to make sure that we get the resources that we need. Like, for instance, Shake Alert, which is an earthquake warning system that we put on the West Coast. I got the funding to put that all in the state of California, or water projects that deliver water from the north to the south, that kind of thing. So been working on those things for years.
I know you have. You've done great things when I was serving and since then. And I know you've had a lot of distinct challenges, a lot of rainfall, flooding, that sort of stuff has hit your district. And I've seen that you've, managed to send funds there to fix the problem sooner rather than later. So let's stick a little bit on the local issues and the constituents for a while. What are you hearing when you're out and about? I can guess what the top issues are, but what are you hearing? I'm assuming economy, the border. Is there something? Let's hear what you
hit it right there. I mean, it's the economy. It's on everyone's mind, especially inflation. The price of gasoline here in California. It's not just inflation because people travel. They don't just stay in California. I was in Texas 3 weeks ago, and I was driving from San Angelo to Dallas, and I filled up my tank, and I paid $2.61 a gallon. In California, the previous day, I spent $4.85 a gallon. It's same gas, same cash. So what's the difference? It's the regulatory difference in the formulation of gas here in California, and taxes that are imposed upon people. And they know that, and they are upset about it because it's, you think about a typical person that has to drive every day. I have the largest commuter district in the country. Fill your tank up 3 times a week. That's, well over $100 a week additional money over and above what people in Texas are paying. That's, $400 or $500 a month out of your pocket. That's a lot of money. People in the Coachella Valley, their utility prices have tripled in some instances. And so, goodness gracious, you can't afford that. Top of grocery prices and the like, middle class family have a difficult time getting by.
What about the border, Ken? And I know when I was campaigning and serving, obviously it was a problem then. And both parties have struggled to do much of anything, it
Yeah.
seems to me. And this is a decade-long problem. And we always try to throw it at whoever's in charge at the time. But why can't anything be done?
We're getting ahead on this. And wherever you think of the wall, it was working. And we were quite close to getting it done. And matter of fact, all the material was there. It just needed to be finished. Unfortunately, President Biden stopped it immediately once he was elected president. And now we have these gaps all over between Tijuana and Brownsville, Texas, and 10 million to 12 million people across the border. And not just illegal folks coming across for a better life, but terrorists. We have God knows how many hundreds of terrorists that cross that we captured. That's not the people that didn't capture. And then we have the drugs that are coming across. And obviously fentanyl being the drug that 90+% of fentanyl is coming across the Mexican border. The precursor chemicals are coming from China. The two major cartels are manufacturing the fentanyl, and it's being distributed throughout the United States. And we lost over 100,000 people to fentanyl poisoning last year alone. And so it's not just people. It's human trafficking, of course. It's illegal farming. It's illegal fishing. Obviously, the drug trade. The FBI regional head told me if you add it all up, it's $100 billion a year between the two major cartels. And then the Chinese are laundering the money. Talk about insult on injury. They're laundering the money through the banks throughout Central America primarily. And then obviously turning that cash, the usable cash back over to the cartels. And then they skim it and use it to fund their various initiatives in Central and South America. So it becomes obviously a direct national security issue to us because of Chinese influence now in South America and Central America.
So what are we doing about all of that?
Unfortunately, not a lot with this administration. They seem to let Mexico quickly is turning into a narco state because the imposition of this tremendous amount of money that's going into to Mexico. The same thing applies in certain areas in Central America. And so we're going to have to take this on directly, a full government attack on this, using the U.S. Treasury, just go after. We know, by the way, we know who the heads of the cartels are. We know where they live. We know who their lieutenants live. We know their operations. We understand it. We have pretty good operational intelligence. We track terrorist operations in the Middle East quite well. And so we know what to do. We just have to do it. And if what country is going to tolerate losing 100,000 of their citizens, primarily ages of 18 to 45, a year? It's arguably we've lost more people to fentanyl poisoning in the last number of years we lost in World War II. And that is unconscionable. And so I know President Trump knows this. Unfortunately, President Biden knows this, but he won't do anything about it. I think
Why
Trump
is
will.
that? First of all, let me thank you. And just a side note that the little nonprofit that I'm involved with, Mothers Against Prescription Drug Abuse, honored you this past spring for your work and for your knowledge base. I talk a lot about your knowledge base, Ken, but the fact that you're keenly aware of this problem. So we were honored to give you our award for your work in this area. But why is this administration, or let me make it more open, why would any administration slow roll this? And why didn't we act after the first 100,000 people died, let alone the first 10,000 people?
That's a great question. This started I can remember when the first death started about 6-7 years ago, erratic, and then all of a sudden it started picking up, especially around 4 or 5 years ago. And when this drug now is being used in larger and larger amounts and being mixed with supposedly what people believe are just normal pharmaceuticals, like I think they're taking a Xanax. And it's not. We had a 17-year-old girl that was working at Starbucks, and one of her workmates, she was having some menstrual cramps, and she offered her this painkiller. She went in the bathroom and took it, and 5 minutes later, she was dead. And this happens, unfortunately, once a day in Riverside County. On average, once a day, someone dies of fentanyl poisoning. And this happens throughout every county and every state, every day throughout the United States. And that's a good question. What country would put up with this? And so my intent, and I did this in the FY24 bill, and we plussed it up in the FY25 bill, is to increase the amount of dollars for the California National Guard and the other guards throughout that works along the border for training on counter drug capability, and to counter this in a meaningful way using what the resources we have in the Department of Defense. Also, an intelligence gathering on some of these individuals and groups that we need to counter. But it has to be a full government attack. We need to use the U.S. Treasury, the Internal Revenue Service. I think, obviously, the Drug Enforcement Agency, other agencies to go after these individuals. It's the only way they're going to understand this. We did it before. President Reagan went after the cocaine traffic back in the 1980s very effectively, and we need to do it now against this, which is far worse than what happened in the 80s with cocaine.
Ken, there's an effort afoot by a group called Families Against Fentanyl, and perhaps you've heard about this, that we should be listing these cartels as terrorist organizations. Is that possible? Is that a good idea or a bad idea?
Well, there's some legalities that get involved in doing that. Some people ask, I won't go there. But I'll take a look at it. I mean, obviously, if you've got 100,000 people a year dying of something that's a poison, these are people aren't taking this to necessarily get high. They think it's something that they'll be able to wake up in the morning. They take that and they don't. So they unknowingly take this, believing it's something else, and they die. So to me, that is an act of terror. We should do something about it, and I think we will. I don't think we need to designate a group or groups. I just think we need to go after the individuals who are head of these actual criminal organizations. These are large criminal organizations that are not just involved in fentanyl. They're involved in human trafficking. Like I said, they're involved in illegal fishing, illegal farming operations, and all other kinds of activities. And now they're getting involved in what some people believe are legal businesses on both sides of the border, because the way they launder this money is to acquire legitimate businesses or real estate or whatever asset. But normally I wouldn't say use RICO statutes, but we should and start confiscating all their toys and all their wealth and take it away from them.
Absolutely. But Ken, the partnership between these cartels and China is incredibly important to look at. And China is such a threat and growing threat. And this is just one of their avenues, building up their empire and building up their capabilities. China last week was making some very aggressive posturing statements. What's going on with China, even aside from the fentanyl trafficking? How much are you looking at China? Look, the world's in turmoil. I don't know any part of the world is not feeling it. But let's start with China.
Well, if you look at what's going on in Ukraine, for instance, how does Russia finance this war against Ukraine? Russia signs forward contracts on oil to China, which they pay and hold up the ruble. And so China, in effect, is financing the war against Ukraine. The same thing applies to Iran. They buy oil from Iran on future contracts, and they use for their various terrorist activities. They fund Hezbollah, they fund Hamas, they fund a lot of the operations that are going on in the Middle East presently. China is also involved in Africa and some of the significant amount of the economic activity out there, and mining, mineral extraction, the rest of it, basically stealing from these poorer nations to underpin their own economy in China. And God knows they're in South America big time. They're helping prop up Venezuela. They're involved using the skimming money they take from the illegal drug activity to help fund their operations in Central and South America, playing in elections down in South America. And I haven't even got to Asia yet. Obviously, they are building these islands in the South China Sea for military operations, expansion in that area. Vietnam, of all people, all countries, are coming to us for protection. The Philippines, all the countries actually in that region. They're fearful of China, and for a good reason. Obviously, Taiwan on top of the list. 90% of our chip manufacturing comes out of Taiwan, and everything you have electronic. You couldn't do this show if you didn't have the chips that were manufactured in Taiwan. So that's something we're extremely concerned about, and we're trying to get as much capability into Taiwan as soon as possible to hopefully blunt any future attack by China to take over Taiwan, which they believe is the last province of China, the seventh province of China. And by the way, getting back to fentanyl, they have no guilt about this at all. They think this is payback for the opium wars from 120 years ago. I had explained to a Chinese diplomat or spy, whatever you want to call him, that was the Brits, and he said, "Well, you guys are all the same." But they have a long memory.
A lot of people ask me, too, if they're deliberately targeting our military-aged youth with the fentanyl.
Well, it's a side benefit to them, I suspect. They get a lot of, they get to sell a lot of drugs, and some people think of it as some kind of esoteric warfare against the U.S. I wouldn't be, I think they think that is a side benefit. Anything to hurt us is a help to them. And they are doing that. They're doing that economically, and how they captured all the rare earths in the world and capturing that market. And we found out during the pandemic of the supply chain problems that we're having because of China's capturing of all these various, parts of the economy. The pharmaceutical industry, as you mentioned earlier, primarily the base chemicals for the entire pharmaceutical industry comes out of China. Some out of India, but unfortunately we offshored that. And back when you used to make that in Puerto Rico, we offshored that. And unfortunately, now we need to, now we recognize that we need to bring it back. We need to bring back manufacturing into the United States. And I think President Trump is concerned about that also, and he wants to bring that back as quickly as possible. And we can compete now with automation. What we've seen Elon doing, if you've been to a Tesla plant or if you've been to the battery plant he has out in Reno, it's amazing how far we've come in manufacturing capability. So now's the time to bring it back to the country.
Absolutely. It's a no-brainer. I mean, not only for the economy, but for national security issues and
Yes.
so much more. You think that we're going to see anything positive out of Russia and Ukraine? Are we going to see an end to this sometime soon?
Well, I hope so. I hate war. There's been 1 million casualties in this war in the last 2.5 years. That's killed and injured, primarily on the Russian side. The Russians have lost 600,000 people, probably about 250,000 dead. The rest injured, and these are severe injuries: arms, legs, brain injuries. These are World War I tactics. We've got artillery on artillery. Who would have thought we would have had a shortage of 155 rounds for artillery here in the United States? But we just didn't foresee that kind of war, especially in Europe. And the Ukrainians have taken significant losses also. At some point, this war has to come to an end. I'm hopeful that President Trump can bring these groups together, but obviously Ukrainians hate the Russians. I can't tell you how much they hate. They have a long memory of what Stalin did to them, executed 20 million Ukrainians prior to World War II and during World War II, actually, that whole time frame. And if you think the Ukrainians hate the Russians, the Polish hate them even more. So if they weren't stopped in Ukraine, the Russians would have taken Ukraine. They would have taken Moldova. They probably thought that they could take the Balkans without triggering Article 5 of NATO. Then we could have been into a World War situation. So that's not the outcome we want. We want to end these wars. And Poland if you put Russia up against the Polish border, that's just a recipe for disaster. So it's a difficult situation, and hopefully it gets resolved here soon, because those countries cannot continue to take that level of casualties. This is generational to them. They'll be having to deal with this for a long time. Their healthcare systems, the rest, it's really a horrible, horrible situation. This war never should have happened. If President Trump had been in power, this war would have never started. The war in the Middle East never was. We had Iran starved for cash. They couldn't finance their terrorist operations outside of their own country. We had them on their knees, and Biden basically fed them back the cash, and now they're rich, and now they're funding all these terrorist operations worldwide.
We'll continue with our interview in a moment, but first I'd like to thank my sponsors. Lucy Pet Foods is the leader in gut health. Their formulas for life feature prebiotic, balanced fiber that nourishes your dog and cat's total health. Every purchase helps support the Lucy Pet Foundation, a 501c3 charity helping animals. Save 15% off your first order and use the promo code SAGELYSPEAKING, all one word, and you will get free shipping at lucypetfoods.com. If you're committed to tackling the opioid and addiction crises, then you need to be at the 2025 RX Summit. Use code SAGELY, that's SAGELY, for an extra $100 off. Join top experts and professionals as we share strategies for prevention, deflection, treatment, and recovery. Don't miss this chance to be part of the change. Head over to rx-summit.com to register now. That's rx-summit.com for an additional $100 off. And a thank you to Mothers Against Prescription Drug Abuse, driving solutions to prevent drug abuse and overdose deaths by focusing on prevention through education and awareness. Go to mapta.net for more information. And now, back to our interview. We're recording this episode a couple of weeks before the election, the presidential election. So who knows how it's going to turn out? And it's easy to see it as a tale of two cities, how the outcome is going to go, proverbially speaking. Oh, I'm just mincing my words up today. Ken, you make me nervous. Just kidding. But no, I think that people understand, they feel this angst for sure. But something I want to push you a little bit on here is how much misinformation, disinformation, propaganda is out there for the American people, let alone the world. It's so hard for people to actually get truthful information, and it is affecting how people are feeling, the anxiety level, how they're going to vote, how they're seeing things. Do you all talk much about this and solutions to this, and now the role of AI in elections?
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I mean, you see a lot. It's just terrible information. I go to a meeting and I come out of the meeting and the press has reported what happened in the meeting and it's totally inaccurate. And I was there. So, that's from the mainstream media. So not to mention all of these other media sources. It's not like it was 40 years ago when people would watch Walter Cronkite on CBS and think that they had a pretty good idea what was going on. It was even-handed, they thought, and CBS, NBC, ABC. Now, people don't have to listen to that. They can listen to anything they want. They can listen to a podcast or a blog, or they can read something that they would want to read, something probably what they want to agree with, and they're not getting, fair information, and that we have to do a better job of that. I think it was really helpful when Elon decided to buy Twitter. I thought it was probably a terrible business decision, but it was the right decision to make as far as trying to open up exercise of the First Amendment, where people can read as many things as you can and make up your own mind. Don't just necessarily believe what someone is telling you or what you're reading. Find out the facts and dispassionately and emotionally, and make your own decisions. You're right. There is a lot of misinformation out there.
Yeah,
and a lot of that is being pushed by China and by Russia and by our adversaries.
Yep, you know it. More so than ever. I mean, it feels to me that this is just destruction from within. Our culture is crumbling, and they tinker with it. They inflict things on us that suddenly we're arguing about and wrestling over, and we're angry at our neighbors. I had dinner last night with a retired professor of politics, political science from the University of Texas. It was fascinating. Obviously, professor, liberal, although he's from Texas. But it was fascinating. And he said something to me that was very interesting. Even though he's a liberal, he talked about, the importance of the conservative party and where we're going. And Ken, to a little bit, I feel like the issues like that you and I ran on in the 90s, the late 90s, if you stick them in a Yahtzee cup right now and shake it up and throw those dice on the table, you don't know which party is going to stand for anything anymore. And I mean, we are becoming isolationist. I don't believe you are, but as a party, are we going that route? Are we still talking about defunding NATO?
Well, Mary, I have a theory about that. As Americans, is we've always been isolationists. I think culturally, we thought we had the Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean. We were very reluctant to get into World War One. This country was very reluctant to get into World War II. We had large amounts of folks protesting about us entering into those wars. And to this day, people are upset about us getting involved in this or that. I like to think America is the great country. It has a moral compass, and we're not interested in taking things over or occupying nations. We want freedom of the seas. We want economic freedom. We want intellectual freedom. And but there is a group of folks, and I wouldn't just say just on the Republican side, but throughout this thread throughout America, is why should we get involved in that or this and other things? I hear about it all the time, especially right now on Ukraine. What interest do we have as a nation in helping Ukraine? That's the same question. What interest do we have in helping Israel? What interest do we have in helping the countries in the South China Sea that want to be free from influence of China? It's our own interest to do that. It's to have a free and open world economy. It's not in the interest of some countries to allow that to happen. So we have a responsibility, I think, as the leaders of the world to be helpful. And not in a military way necessarily. We have to be a strong nation to defend ourselves. But economically, it's in our benefit. We're 4% of the world population, but we're 25% of the world's GDP. So we can't, as a nation, survive without our ability to sell our products to every other country in the world, and every other country to help to sell products into America. So it's a workable deal, and it's worked to the benefit of Americans for a long time. And we need to make that continue to happen.
You and I were together for much of the day on 9/11 in 2001. That was a very surreal day. But even on 9/11, didn't we sort of thought we were safe, we were in a bubble, we were protected. And we had seen in the QDR that was released just months before that, if I remember correctly, that we would be attacked on American soil sometime within the next 25 years. Little do we know that it was actually going to turn out in the next few weeks. The malaise that we get into is what concerns me a lot. And when we have our heads in the sand about these threats, and look, you and I both believe in the peace or strength, Ronald Reagan, absolutely, undisputable truth in that. But what I really want to say is pivot to my service with you in 9/11 and what that meant, what we were going through, what things felt like. Very bewildering. At the end of the day, if you remember, we stood on the steps of the Capitol and sang God Bless America. We had a briefing with FBI and a whole bunch of intelligence officials about what had happened, what was still happening, who might still be in the air, all sorts of things like that. But, that day for me was a moment in my career, and I don't know where I'm going to go to this with you, is moments in your career like that will just be forever etched on your memory from your service. Was 9/11 one of the biggest?
I think it was a horrific day for our country and for the world, but it was also a day that it was one of those rare moments where all of us, as you said, stood on the Capitol steps and sang God Bless America. It was a very emotional time for all of us. And it taught us, I think, that we aren't without risk in this country, that our enemies can reach out and touch us. And they did in a real way that day, obviously in New York and the Pentagon and fields in Pennsylvania. And so it was a hard lesson to learn. And that lesson has not gone away. It's certainly not with me, but maybe with others it's faded. But I think about that every day when I make decisions about the security of this country, is that this country can be attacked. And now there are weapons out there that are extremely serious weapons that, if got into the United States, cause catastrophic loss. And so we have to stay vigilant as a nation. Our intelligence agencies need to stay vigilant. I remember we created this this committee called PSYOP right after 9/11, called the Select Intelligence Oversight Panel. For God knows what reason they made me the ranking member on it. I remember I knew nothing about intelligence. I hadn't served on any intelligence committees. So, well, you're going to be the ranking member. So it was supposed to be the super intelligence committee. It would be would supervise the appropriations process, the authorizing process, all the intelligence operations. There would be no firewall between domestic insurance and, domestic intelligence and foreign intelligence operations for this particular committee, because the belief was that because of all the firewalls in the intelligence community that we didn't know or should have known what we should have known because they weren't talking to each other. The stovepipe mentality in intelligence. But we eventually got rid of that thing, and because it was not a good idea. But the concept was good. But as a nation, we have to stay internally vigilant, because there are countries out there that want to destroy the concept of the United States. And that concept, of course, is a free, open country that's, to democracy. And we're an example of that. So our enemies want to destroy that. And if they have the capability, they will do so. Whether it's China or whether it's Russia or Iran, North Korea, others that
Are all of them together?
all working together, by the way.
Yeah.
And China's the money guy behind it right now. China is funding North Korea. They're funding Iran. They're funding all of these.
Ken, I could talk to you for a long, long time about this stuff, but I want to pivot a little bit before I lose you. And I know you're extremely busy today in your district. But I'm going to go with something positive, space.
Yeah.
And I know you have been involved in space for a long time. You used to serve on the science committee and had a lot of interest in space. And I know you still do. And I would, years ago, I would be frustrated because I think we lost our vision, and we lost our aspirational, interest and curiosity about going to space. We're so busy looking down at our smartphones that we forget to look up at the stars. But my goodness, we're seeing a lot of positive stuff going on in space. I mean, whether it's what, Elon is doing, whether it's, a whole bunch of other folks are doing. Of course, setbacks maybe with what's going on with a couple of astronauts stuck on station. But your role in space, and what do you see? Give us some positive news.
That is, where we were at a number of years ago. NASA, we had the shuttle, which we probably should have retired some time ago. But
Don't tell my husband that, Ken.
I know, but it was a significant amount of our budget. But we didn't have any other launch capability other than United Launch Alliance, which was between Boeing and Lockheed. Our launch cost was extraordinarily high, and we needed new entrants into the launch to get launch capability. And obviously, SpaceX got into that. It's dropped our launch costs by over 50%. And now with Starship, we believe it'll drop the launch cost by another 50%. That's good. But unfortunately, nobody can compete against that because he's dropped launch costs so much that it's hard for new entrants to get into the launch business. Jeff Bezos has been putting a lot of money into his capability. Can't seem to get there. I want him to get there. I've been through his facility in Florida. God knows he's got a tremendous amount of resources tied up in that. When he made a decision to go to these methane engines, I can get into the minutia of this. But obviously, from the Department of Defense perspective, we're very interested in making sure that we have launch costs reasonably low for we can get into space, and that we increase our capabilities. And we've created the Space Force, the Guardians, where we can focus on space. I want to help NASA out a little bit. Their budgets are small relative to the Department of Defense. We spend a lot more money on space than they do, but they do a lot of great we want to make sure that they maintain that capability. Working with Boeing has been a challenge. Boeing, obviously, as you mentioned, the problem with their capsule, these leaks, these helium leaks. I want Boeing to succeed. I want Boeing as a company to succeed. We cannot allow, or we can't, we have to have Boeing survive. And Boeing is on their space programs on the ropes. And I hope that they can pull through this. And I hope Jeff Bezos pulls through this. As a nation, we can't just have one launch company. There's some other small entrants coming into the business, but there's a lot of future in space. Starlink has been incredibly successful program. It's probably his most valuable asset at this point.
I'm using it right now to talk to you.
Yeah,
So
or if you live in a rural area, it's fabulous. We ought to be using that instead of fiber. Fiber is kind of great in urban areas, but where you're at, it doesn't make sense to run fiber out in the middle of nowhere. So I don't know if you're out in the middle of nowhere. I don't know.
I'm close to out in the middle of nowhere, but on the
Okay.
fringe, fringe
Okay.
of nowhere. But I still do use it. And how about space tourism? I know that's not directly under you, I suppose, any longer, but
Yeah.
space tourism is very exciting to a lot of people. And unfortunately, it's out
Um,
of most people's price range by a gazillion times. But are you seeing a lot of movement there and possibilities?
Well, I think that's going to be a business of the future. I think that as launch costs come down, if we get some new entrants into the launch business, which I hope we do. Now with Starship, by the way, the inside of a Starship is the size of inside of like walking into the side of a C-17. It can put up 150 metric tons into outer and lower into space. That's like putting the entire space station up in 2 launches.
That's
It took us,
amazing.
I forgot how many launches it was, 75, 80 launches, I don't know. But in 2 launches, it is,
That's just amazing.
I go down to Brownsville, Texas now and then to look at that thing. And it's unbelievable. And I don't know if you saw when they captured the lower stage the other day with a chopstick.
Yeah, sure did.
I mean,
Wow. Yeah.
it made everybody in America very proud, the prowess of that technology.
Yep.
It's a little, let's face it, SpaceX has gone way beyond NASA's capability. They're way beyond everyone in the world. So we want others to try to catch up. So that's going to be the challenge.
Well, we sure do. So, Ken, lastly, can you share I know off the top of mind thinking, what are your greatest moments in Congress, or one of your greatest and maybe one of your funniest? If you have a funny story, and I know there are a lot, but if there's
I think one of my funniest moments in Congress was with Sonny Bono. We had a bad time when Newt was almost decapitated from power. Newt sometimes 10 ideas. One of them was actually good, and sometimes would drive the conference absolutely batty. There was this coup attempt. It failed, but it created a lot of discourse in our conference. I remember we had this meeting. Everybody was going nuts, and Sonny got up and he brought the place down. And ending with his little comment with that
tattoo
paradise tattoo.
from Fantasy Island, right? Oh my
Yeah,
God.
yeah, it was something that we needed, and the reporters outside couldn't understand why we were all laughing so hard inside the conference.
When you're trying to remove Newt from office and there's laughter just flowing out of the conference room. So if
Just
I remember
diffused
the story,
everywhere.
but the story he used to tell was, Sonny had many ups and downs in his careers, very significant highs and pretty drastic lows, but he was on the set of Love Boat, and the character who played, I think his name was Tattoo.
I think it was Fantasy Island.
Fantasy Island walked this character walked over and kicked Sonny in the shin, and Sonny said that was the epiphany that he needed to move on to something else and to try something new, if I remember correctly. And I don't know what context he used that at that moment in the conference to make everybody laugh.
He said, "This too shall pass."
Yeah, this too shall pass. Yeah.
So when anybody's down, just something at that moment you think it's the worst thing on the planet, something else is going to come along. So don't dwell on it. Just move on.
Well, that's great that you remember that so well. That's a long time ago now, Ken. A long time.
I've been around. I'm the longest serving Republican in the state of California, and I'm the third
There
most
aren't very
senior.
many of you.
I know.
But like you're the top dog of 5 or 6.
Oh gosh, well, there's some to have in my mind some experience at this and understand how the process works. Been able to bring more resources back to California than any member of Congress since Jerry, and it's helpful to the state, not just in my own district, even though they are coming after me.
Oh, I know. Been there, done that. How does it feel to be walking in my high heels for a change in my shoes?
Yeah.
I went through that, but let me just say this about you, and before I let you go. It's not only what you've brought back to California. We all worry about that moment in time, when the president is awoken at 2 a.m. Members of Congress have very similar situations constantly. And especially when you're a senior member, as you are, junior members look to you for your thoughts, for your thinking, for how you're voting, to figure out how you're voting. And if they're voting the other way, they better figure out why, because you are, a senior leader. But you have, though, knowledge. And this is why I really wanted to get you on this podcast, because you are so important in the Congress. And people need to know that what you know, and people need to understand, my dear listeners, members of Congress have issues that run the gamut, from school lunch programs onto space launch vehicles. I mean, everything in between that. It's a lot to cover. It's a lot to know, and it comes with experience. But somebody like you, Ken, and with the committees you served on, the experiences you've had, the relationships you've had with your constituents, I mean, it is so important. And I hope you continue to serve a few more years, certainly while the world is crazy. And I don't know if it's ever going to not be crazy, but I do admire you. And there's the old one, E.F. Hutton talks, people listen. I say when Ken Calvert talks, people listen. So
That's nice of you to say that. Thank you. And I enjoyed serving with you and still enjoy talking to you as a good friend from time to time. And I'm glad you're doing well.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad to be in my seat and that you're in your seat. I'm happier where I am and happy that you are where you are. I just want to thank you again, Congressman Calvert, for joining us on Sagely Speaking. And to my listeners, thank you very much. I hope you found this episode as interesting as I did. To our sponsors, thank you. Without you, we couldn't make this podcast possible. So until we meet again, be well.